It is Thursday, January 14th. You are here for WSSDA's first in-session live of the 2025 legislative session. We like to start with a people's acknowledgement that says, we acknowledge that our public schools and facilities operate on the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples. As we begin this 2025 legislative session, we remember that the lands of our state capital were cared for by the people of the Squaxin and the Squally tribes. We make these acknowledgements to open a space of recognition, inclusion, and respect for our sovereign tribal partners and all Indigenous students, families, staff, legislators, and board members in our communities. I also like to start with a little bit of a tidbit of information so that you are quote unquote in the know. There is a new Washington State Legislature online website. If you haven't had a chance to peruse it, I would highly encourage you to do so. There is a link here that takes you directly to the committee dates, agendas, and materials. I would recommend that you bookmark it for easy finding. It is one of the places that I go to online multiple times per day. A couple things for our agenda today. I'm going to share some resources that I think are important for you to just keep in the back of your mind as you navigate the days and weeks ahead. We have our executive director giving you a presentation that was also shared with the legislature this week. The WSSDA board president and I will be sharing a little bit about the context for the 100 and now 4 days ahead of us in the, oh, I'm sorry, no less than that, 101 days ahead of us. Every day matters in the 2025 legislative session. Then I want to talk about a couple bills from this past week, as well as some important bills next week. I'll get into a little bit of the policy detail around it, but mostly wanted to alert you to them so that you and your school board members and other related staff could dive in. We'll also go over some of the resources that are available to you, both from the Washington State Legislature as well as from WSSDA. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start from the top. I wanted to let you know that there is a 2025 legislative roster now available that is almost entirely updated to reflect current legislator names and email addresses, as well as their legislative assistants' names and email addresses. I'm not going to click on this link here because I'm not going to go through the list itself. I just wanted you to know that it is available. This has been a highly sought after resource from many of you, and it's finally, for the most part, been updated to reflect all the changes that we know have occurred for 2025. I would just remind you that as you're considering how to communicate with your legislators, when you do, in email in particular, or even when you make a phone call, that you're always including the legislative assistant as part of that communication. That's imperative during the session if you actually want your communications to be read, not because legislators are ignoring you, just because the volume of communication coming their way is so immense that they absolutely need support on that. So your your legislative assistants or LAs are usually your first point of contact for communicating with legislators. I also wanted to point you to on the Washington State Legislature online website, as you're trying to figure out, I'm going to stop share and reshare so that you can actually see what I'm looking at. That if you haven't had a chance to navigate this yet, a couple things I'm going to point you to try to make it easier for you to find what you're looking for. This is the home page of the Washington State Legislature online. It includes, a countdown, so that's important, but right below that, the schedule for today. So this is today, January 16th. It lists all the hearings that are going on, the agendas, which will also have bill links, which will also have a link for you to register to sign in for the record or testify if you're doing so on behalf of your district. And then if you're not able to watch in person, you can view the video. It'll take you to the live TVW link. So this will be updated daily to reflect what's happening on today's schedule. And if you are interested in actually learning about what might be happening ahead, you'll need to go to the committee schedule, agendas, and documents page here and select the date range that you're looking for. So if it's today through next Thursday, you would indicate as such, refresh the search button here, And then you would scroll through the bottom, paying attention to what the date says, and it will list it in order of date and time. So again, I'm trying to work to empower you to find information that you need if you need it at your fingertips. But as you know, I'm always available if you have questions, although my response time during the legislative session may be slower than you're used to because I'm in a hearing or talking with a legislator or another education partner. And may not get back to you as quickly as I like to. And therefore, if you're able to find the information on your own, you may feel happier about that. So this is one way to get information that you might be seeking most readily. I'm going to go ahead and stop share, go back to the agenda. I'll be doing a little bit of this dance all day today, so thanks for your patience. Another important resource that I included here as we kick off the 2025 legislative session is the session cutoff calendar. I'm going to pull that up as a link because I do think it's important for you to see it. I'm going to stop share and reshare. I got this down. Okay, at least I think so. You'll tell me if I don't. I'm going to increase the size because even with glasses, my eyes are challenged. This is the updated 2025 cutoff calendar, we call it. So you will note that the date, the month is listed here, the date is listed here, and it will increase as you progress down the page, the day of the week and the day of the session. So the reason why I think it's important for you to be aware of this is that in my role and in the roles of my partners who are in a similar position, we are watching this closely because most importantly coming up, we know that the first policy committee cutoff will be February 21st. And what that means is that any House bill that has been referred to committee and heard in committee has to be passed out of that committee in order for it to continue to progress through the legislative session. So I'm going to take, we've got a handful of special education bills as an example. I don't have the numbers committed to memory quite yet, but I will soon. In the meantime, as we think about some of those bills we care most about, like special education funding, there are several that are going to be heard in Senate Education next Wednesday, actually. That's great. That means that they're being heard early in the committee. That gives plenty of time over the next multiple weeks for it to be brought back for an executive session where they have the opportunity to vote it out of committee and onto the fiscal committee. I'm not even going to go into detail about what that means. It's important that it continues to progress. I just wanted to remind you that the first round of bills that die will be identified on Friday, February 21st, because if they haven't made it out of their policy, they haven't successfully passed out of their policy committee of origin. Most for us, that's going to mean they haven't passed out of one of the two education committees. That means the bill most likely will not see the light of day for the rest of this session. There are caveats to that, but they're rare, and I can dive into that later. So an important date for us to look ahead. I will also tell you from a policy perspective, that day is important because it allows us to narrow our focus on bills that actually will continue to progress through the session. Okay. Just giving you a little grounding in our advocacy tools here before we get started on some of the content. Another thing to note, I'm not going to open this one up, but I wanted you to know that it was a resource and should be a priority for you. There are two great resources here. One is the Legislative Advocacy Planning Explainer. And basically what that means is it's a two-pager actually that gives some context for how you can be thinking about elevating legislative priorities specific to funding and increasing the allocations for special education, transportation, and material supplies and operating costs. Kind of explains a little bit about how you can be planning locally to continue to progress those priorities throughout the session. And then there's actually a template that has been developed where you and your fellows, including your superintendent and other staff, can be identifying who among you is going to say what and when you're going to do it. And the goal of this resource is to help you make a plan for how you will be communicating regularly and consistently throughout the legislative session. If you haven't already reached out to your legislators to say, I hope you're having a great start to the 2025 legislative session. I see that in committee next week, you're going to be hearing some of the priorities of our organization. I want to offer to be a resource to you. In the meantime, thank you for your leadership in this space. And that would still be relevant even if you've got legislators who aren't in the education committees. They should know that these bills have already been identified for early action, so that they are already paying attention to it and they can vote favorably to those priorities in the future. So a way for you to plan who's going to say what when, so that you are always saying something as it relates to our legislative priorities. And then another really cool resource I just wanted to point you to, if you weren't at legislative conference this past weekend, we heard from a keynote speaker from the Dignity Index, a tool that WSSDA staff has used pretty extensively, especially in our professional development last regional meetings. We provided some context for how the Dignity Index can be used in your own board work, both in how you communicate with one another, as well as how you communicate and respond to your public, your community members. This is a fun little, I'd call it the Wordle of dignity, as in you have the opportunity every day to go in and sort of evaluate the civility or lack thereof of speech, which is a great way for you to sort of teach yourself how to do the same. So just a few sort of pieces of resource and materials that are helpful as we begin this work for a very long session. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my screen off and make sure that Trisha, our executive director, oh, she's there. She's already on top of things. I don't know if I've made you co-host yet. Do you have co-host capabilities already, Trisha?
I'm pretty sure I do, but we'll find out in just a minute, won't we?
Yeah, as soon as I stop my share. So I want to welcome, in case you don't know, Trisha Lubach. She is WSSDA's executive director. Pleased to have her join us today. I think she'll always be listening in the background at least, but today she will be presenting. And I asked her to present for us today because WSSDA had the special opportunity to present to the members of the House Education Committee. Chair Santos invited WSSDA, among several other organizations, to present a little context about who we are and what we do, and also what we don't do a little bit. And Trisha did a beautiful job representing the organization. You can watch the full recording from TVW, but in case you don't do that, we've got her here right now, and she's going to give a little bit of it was only a 5-minute presentation, so she's essentially going to do the same thing for you that she did for the members of our legislature, because it's really great grounding in WSSDA or as an organization and the work that we do. So Trisha, I'm going to turn it to you.
Great. Thank you. I want to thank you all for being here today. And just note that I'm going to try not to get distracted by the fact that Marissa mentioned in the same sentence a couple of my favorite things. One is Wordle and one is the Dignity Index. So I'm really excited to jump into that and see how I can combine two of my early morning activities. Thank you for being here. Thank you for advocating on behalf of your districts. And with WSSDA, I am going to get started and share the slideshow that I shared with the legislature. And I think I'm going to have to forgive me as I'm getting myself organized here. Just a second. I want to be able to share. Oh, Marissa, sharing is turned off for me. That's the problem.
How mean of me. Let me correct
It's very protective of you to make sure that I can't share things.
little checks and balances on things. I like that. All right.
So, okay, let me see if I can be more successful in that this time. Here we go. We'll share and PowerPoint. And then I'm going to start that. Nothing like a stream of consciousness. Everybody loves that. So, okay, there we go. I think are we in good shape here now, Marissa?
Yep, looks great. It's
Perfect.
perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, great. Well, as Marissa mentioned, the House Ed Committee, led by Representative Santos, she runs a tight ship. And so I knew that 5 minutes was it, and then we would have a couple of minutes for questions. So I will give a couple of extra minutes for some slides that I didn't expand upon with them. But essentially, I think that her whole concept in making sure that all of the education committee members, and some of them are new, have a full understanding of who the agencies are that support education and the education groups in the state of Washington, what they do, what the context is, who they serve, and also what's their grounding in terms of where they get their authority, what RCWs are connected with them. And so I thought it was, again, a thoughtful a thoughtful goal on her part, and there were a number of agencies, including us, who participated quite happily. So just an overall view of the statewide system. Obviously, the education system in Washington State is large and complex, and it involves a number of different entities. You can see here, obviously, we have the 295 school districts, the 9 educational service districts that serve those, over 1.1 million students, and a state budget of almost 12 billion. But the area where WSSDA swims is in supporting and providing resources to the 1,477 school directors that are in those 295 school districts. So a little bit of background, just in general, what WSSDA is. WSSDA is a state agency that's authorized by the legislature to be self-governing. And as you all know, every school board member in the state of Washington is a member of WSSDA automatically. A reminder for them that WSSDA has no regulatory authority and also, in almost all cases, receives no funding from the legislature. There are 1 or 2 small exceptions to that are kind of project-based, but WSSDA is a self-supporting state agency. And then WSSDA provides statewide training and guidance, as well as legislative advocacy support, policy, and legal resources for boards. So that's really our lane there. They asked us to describe what the authority is for WSSDA's functions, and I mentioned to them that WSSDA celebrated its centennial last year. We are 101 years old. The association was created through statute by the legislature, and it's kind of a confusing description. I think I would have reworded it had they asked me. I wasn't around when they created this RCW, but essentially it's really just to serve as the ability for a state agency to be supporting the school directors who play a vital role in the state's nearly 300 school districts. What is WSSDA? Essentially, WSSDA's people. It includes all of you as members. It includes the staff. It includes all of the other organization or all of the other committees and groups within WSSDA, including the WSSDA board. Just a note to the legislature that WSSDA elects its own board of directors, as well as members of the WSSDA standing committees, and that the WSSDA members vote on their own advocacy platform. Also just showed them the RCW that indicates that all school board members are automatically members of the state association. And again, reminded them that really, you can think of WSSDA as both a school directors professional association and also a state agency that's self-supporting. And I think that is one of the differences between us and most of the agencies that reported alongside us earlier this week. So what's our purpose? What are we here for? We have our mission and vision here, but essentially what it comes down to is that WSSDA exists in order to build leaders among school board members. And we do that by empowering our members. And as many of you know, you take advantage of the skills and the tools and the knowledge that we share with each of you through training and professional development, as well as through policy and legal resources and advocacy resources. The goal is to support school board members in supporting the excellence of education within their own school districts. So WSSDA serves school board members, and school board members serve the families, students, and their own communities. Just a little bit of information here about Washington school board members. It was a reminder to the legislature that they are the largest group of elected officials in the state of Washington. Almost all of them, with the exception of, I believe, just 2 school districts, are elected to 4-year terms. And also, being elected officials, school board members can only be removed from office by either being voted out by their voting public, in other words, not being reelected, or through a recall process. Again, that is not any different from the legislators themselves, because just like them, school board members are elected officials. I thought it was helpful to explain to especially this new members of the committee, that there are a couple of things we can do and a couple of things that we don't do. One of them, as you all know, is that WSSDA does not possess any legal authority over school boards or over individual school directors. Again, they are elected officials. We don't exert authority. We do, however, have the ability to provide influence, training, a wide variety of resources, our model policies, information advocacy, and then just the ability for all of you to connect with each other. You can do that statewide when we have our events like Ledge Conference that we just had this weekend, annual conference at General Assembly, and then regionally you can do that when we have caucus meetings as well as our regional meetings that happen in the spring. So sharing with them what are some of WSSDA's functions. Those functions really are focused around the support that WSSDA's nonpartisan staff provides for school directors. These won't be a surprise to most of you. They fall primarily into the areas of policy and legal supports, strategic advocacy, and leadership development services. And within the training and the professional development that we provide, the leadership development, we really promote a common framework. And that framework is found in essentially what we describe as the 3 functions of school board leadership. And those apply both to your school board leadership as well as your individual leadership as a school board member. And those are the visionary leadership, effective governance, and strategic advocacy. So all of our products and services that we provide all of you as members, they're designed within these 3 function areas to help you be the most effective board member that you can be. We didn't share these 3 slides in detail with the committee, again, due to time constraints, but I wanted them to be able to have the ability to come back and look if they wanted to dive into specifically what are the services in the 3 different branches. So this describes some of the primary services within leadership development. You're probably familiar with a lot of these. If you're not familiar with some of them, dive into our leadership development services page on our website, and you can find a lot of information about all of these programs. This is not all encompassing. There are a lot of resources and services that we provide in all 3 areas. Strategic advocacy services, again, because you're with us today, you might be particularly interested in this area. You can see a number of the items that Marissa already mentioned, like the bill tracker and the weekly legislative updates. Of course, you're participating in one of the services right now with InSession. We're glad that you're here for that. And then policy and legal resources are, again, a really vital support for school board members. Not only just the legal resources, but also you all know that the Model Policy Library is hugely important to the work that you do within your districts, ensuring that you have policies that are up to date, complete, and ensure that you're legally compliant. There are also a variety of other resources. The team in policy and legal provides some amazing work through the publications, the P&L policy and legal news publication is one that I certainly look forward to reading each time it's issued. Again, the Chair Santos was interested in us sharing how our work is affected by state legislation. And just one example that I was one that I was intimately involved in during my time in the leadership development branch. This came out of House Bill 5044 back in 2020 because we weren't busy with anything else in 2020. But this RCW identified the requirement for equity training for all school board members. It was a complex piece of legislation, but it included both the requirement that school board members take this, and they call it a governance training program, but it was really focused around cultural competency, diversity, equity, and inclusion standards. So those, it required that WSSDA develop those standards and that we do so in collaboration with a number of groups, including the PESB, the Professional Educator Standards Board, and then that we develop the curriculum that aligns with that, and that we provide the training to school board members in a variety of ways, and that school board members take those within a certain time frame. So that was a very big lift for WSSDA. Again, just a reminder that the legislature didn't fund any of that. But we have successfully launched that and had a really good response from members. This is just a list currently of some of the legislatively required training. So under that educational equity requirement that I just described, WSSDA has developed and delivered these 5 2.5-hour trainings. You can see them listed here. Committing to educational equity, advancing inclusion through belonging. We go into just an explanation of the foundations of cultural proficiency. Identity discrimination is another one. You may have taken one or more of these. And then the Discovering Educational Disparities is a brand new one that Heather Curl, who is now the Director of Leadership Development, is rolling out. And then most of you are familiar with open government training. WSSDA doesn't provide that per se. That's generally done through the Attorney General's office, but we provide space for it at our annual conference, and that's at no charge. So that was just an example for the committee of what kind of trainings are legislatively required. And then, of course, I closed in exactly the way Marissa always tells us to close, which is thanking them for their time and their service to our state's public education students. And I bet I went over 5 minutes, Marissa. I didn't even time myself this time.
It's good context. I realize for many of you, you came here probably for some bill analysis, but I do think it's important for you to be aware that at least on the House education side of the legislative session, they're really focused on doing work sessions this week and many next week too. If you look at the calendar, Representative Santos was clear about this going into session, that her aim is not to pass a lot of policies this session, but rather to ensure that the members of her committee, whether they are new or returning, are equipped with a very comprehensive view of the public education system, so that as they're considering policies in this session and future sessions, they have a good grounding in what is and what isn't. And so we're honored that that included some education of who WSSDA is and what we do. I also think it's important as you're thinking about what legislators are saying, but also what they're asking. Some of the questions that they asked Tricia, which she handled with grace, included, just to clarify, those are the only legally required trainings to become a school director. Is that correct? And so we walked back through that. So I think it's interesting that question was asked. And then there was another question about does WSSDA have regulatory authority or not? That was pretty clear in the presentation, but we just had to go back to it to reiterate that WSSDA has no regulatory authority over school directors, but school boards have authority at the local level within their school district. So that was clarified in a couple different questions. Anything you would add to that, Tricia, about that Q&A session?
Well, I think the follow-up part of that question too was, would you like regulatory authority, which we perhaps danced around a bit and said, well, no, we're not, that's not what we're at. We're not asking for that. That's not our role. And our role is really a support one for school board members.
Yeah, great. Thank you for being there this week, Tricia, and for your presentation to us. I'm going to move us to the rest of the agenda. So with that, I want to start digging in a little bit to WSSDA legislative advocacy, sort of the program of advocacy that we work. Again, because this is our first before we're really kicking off the session, I wanted to be sure everyone's grounded in an understanding about how we advocate. And I thought it would be important for the WSSDA board president to give a big picture view of that from the WSSDA board's perspective that I share. So thank you, Derek, for being here. I will pass the microphone to you, so to speak.
Thanks, Marissa. Yeah, and I see a lot of very experienced board members over there in the attendee list, but also some new ones from the last couple of years. And I would say that even if you went through the short session last year, the long session hits different, as the kids would say. It's exhausting, it's long, and stay hydrated because it's not going to end anytime soon. So one of the things Marissa asked me to talk a little bit about is a conversation that we've been kicking around for a few years about just in general how WSSDA and its members approach legislators on these sorts of issues. Because a lot of things happen, and once you get the scars of going through a few of these, you start to see some commonalities, and you start to have some ideas about how we might be more effective. So, the first one I would bring up is there will be many bills. There will be many topics of conversation that come up, and there will be a lot that dominate the things other people talk about in the world. But we want to just make sure we're keeping our focus on the big three priorities. And if you were at the legislative conference this week, or you've read literally anything that WSSDA has put out in the past few months, you know that those are special education funding, MSOCs, and transportation. Because along with everything else that's going on out there, those are the three we want to always try to bring the conversation back to, because that's what our students and our districts really, really need right now. The second piece is balancing how we talk about the need that we're seeing. I know that there are a lot of districts that are in financial difficulty right now. We saw some statistics on that this past weekend of just how many are in one of a few different levels of some real financial stress. And I know as a school director, that falls on you. That is your responsibility to manage, and that brings a lot of stress. And so when you're feeling that, it's hard not to lead with it. But one of the things when we're talking about these priorities, we need to make sure that we're always framing it in terms of the investment that the legislature will be making and how that will help improve outcomes for kids. This is not just about throwing money down a black hole, which is one of the complaints we sometimes get. So when we talk about special education, we need to talk about how the additional funding that they're providing is going to help us better meet the needs of our students. How it's always a struggle to fund the supports that could help because we have such limited resources to meet that need. And then looking forward, how with these sorts of investments, we know, like a lot of districts, or all districts, we're all improving how we deliver these services, whether that's reforming how we do discipline, whether that's inclusionary practices. And those investments will help us do that job even better. We want the legislature to feel like they're investing in making things better. And if we're talking about materials and supplies, Marissa made this point this last weekend. We know that the exploding cost of insurance and utilities is killing our budgets. I mean, that is a huge problem across the entire state. But we're going to pay those bills either way. And so we need the legislature to understand we need you to fund that. We need you to fund the cost increases that we've seen there. Because if you don't, it's going to pull money away from the other 7 categories in MSOC. Things like curriculum, technology, library materials, all the stuff that our kids really need. And that's why this is so important. It's not just about a dollars and cents thing at the end of the day so that we can pay the light bill. And the last suggestion that I'd make as we do this advocacy is our overall demeanor and posture. You ran for school board because you want to make things better. Legislators are human and they run for the same reasons. And they have a lot of ideas about things that they think would make education better, or they've heard from their constituents about things that they think would make education better. And in the past, there have been times occasionally where every time someone had a good idea, our posture, especially when we get in the stressful mid part of the session, is a little bit to throw up the hand and say, unfunded mandate, local control, just this. And we have to be careful about that. that. We don't want them to tune us out. We want them to see us as a partner who is willing to work with them to try to make things better for kids. And so it's hard because it often is an unfunded mandate. It is an infringement on local control, but it might also be a good idea. And so how can we work together on making that good idea come to fruition in a way that doesn't put undue burdens on school districts and allow us for when they have the really bad ideas to say, this one is really bad. We need to oppose this one completely. So we just want to make sure that we're approaching that in the right way. So just the last thing I just want to say to all of you, especially for those of you who are here today, you know it. This is a hugely important session for public education, your engagement, your outreach, all of the things that you're going to do to provide supports and to provide context around the work that Marissa and her colleagues are doing in those halls. It's just incredibly important for our kids, and thank you for everything that you're committing to right now. Marissa, I think that ties me up.
Thank you so much, Derek. I really appreciate you taking time to give some remarks and set the context. Thank you for being here with us. Okay, so let's get into the agenda. I forgot to mention at the very beginning that there is an opportunity as every week when we're doing this and we start getting into more of the policies in deeper detail. Some of my plan will be to bring content area experts and potentially legislators to these meetings so that they can help us do a deeper dive on different policies, and some of the questions or suggestions that you have along the way can help inform which policies we're going to do those deep dives on. Obviously, we're going to focus consistently on our legislative priorities, but there will be other policy issues, as Derek referenced, that we will need to pay attention to and respond to in some way, shape, or form. So these sessions every week will do some deeper dives on some of those as we go through. So you can ask questions or make suggestions in the Q&A. And we will field those as we go, whether they're relevant to today's conversation, or I will make note of them if they're related to content that we might discuss in a future InSession Live. So thanks for that. I'm going to head back to the agenda and then just remind you to continue the conversation about how WSSDA weighs in on policies. As a reminder, we have a bill watch document. I will, actually, I'm just going to point you to where that is right now. It is hyperlinked here, but it is on the WSSDA website. I'm going to click on it just to point you to where it goes on our website. And we will be updating this at a minimum weekly. There are new bills right now being introduced every single day. And so we are updating those, the bill watch that we have every week to try to keep up with the volume of bills that are coming our way. And what we try to do is look at it from a lens of, it's not just in the education committee, those will be on there, but also are they in workforce committee or healthcare, but also impacting K-12. When you look at the weekly schedule, you will first see what's coming up in the week ahead. This has been, I just refreshed this today, so you'll be seeing upcoming events starting just this afternoon, what's happening this afternoon, all the way through next week. So that's the first part of this document. So any bill that we are tracking, if it has a hearing or executive direction, executive action for next week, it will be linked here in the schedule. Then as you scroll to the bottom of the document, you will see that there is a long comprehensive bill list, and we are working on sifting through those where it is relevant or appropriate. If WSSDA has a clear position, we will name it here and specify whether or not it is a WSSDA priority in the final column. In the meantime, just wanted to give you a list of all the bills currently in play. Many have been referred to a committee already. They may or may not get a hearing. And so we're keeping an eye on all of these, and you should as well. And this is your resource to do so. So when a bill gets scheduled for a hearing, it gives us the opportunity then to prioritize its analysis. And when we are looking at the analysis, just gonna pop the schedule back up. When we are looking at a bill, let's just take a specific bill, we are comparing member adopted positions to the content of that bill. So many bills are complex and nuanced, which means we are looking at any bill from the perspective of supportive positions as well as oppositional positions, which often means, as you have maybe experienced in the past, that WSSDA is in a position to weigh in other on a lot of bills because of our very diverse perspective amongst 1,477 members. So it's not just our membership that we know have a variety of perspectives on a given issue, but our member adopted positions reflect that diversity and perspective. So that puts WSSDA as a member driven organization in the position to need to, and morally and ethically have to, represent the diverse perspectives of our membership, which makes it often difficult to be totally in support or totally opposed to bill proposals, particularly when they walk the line of, I'll just use controversial or tense or political or politicized issue. So we're going to be talking about all those things throughout the session, but I'm just giving you a heads up that that's often where WSSDA has to land in order to be effective as well as accurate. And I say effective because I have heard from legislative staff that weighing in other from their perspective means that we are in a position to work with them to try to make the bill better. If we're a clear con or a clear pro, our position is clear, which means that we're probably not going to move one way or the other because they're not going to totally flip the perspective of that bill. But if we're other, that means there's some information there that can help inform improvements to the bill. Very rarely is a bill introduced with the belief that it will pass as it is initially written. There are oftentimes amendments, multiple amendments to any single bill before it actually gets to a governor's desk, if it ever makes it that far, which again is pretty rare in totality. So as we review a bill, compare it against member adopted positions, I also bring bill proposals to the legislative committee. Again, that is your representative standing committee who I meet with weekly every Thursday at 5:30, and we sift through the next week's schedule. I share with them my recommendations of how we will weigh in on bills that are scheduled for the next week after I've done an analysis of the position catalog. And then I gather from them during those conversations perspectives on bill proposals. So what are the potential positive outcomes? What are you doing already? What might be the unintended consequences of implementing this bill? Where are there hidden or obvious costs? Where are there landmines that should be elevated to our legislators so that they are aware that this could cause some trouble at the local level? Those are conversations I have every week with your legislative committee. Again, you elect your legislative committee representatives, 2 per director area. And so you will often hear from your legislative committee members during a session, what do you think about this topic? Can you get me some data on this issue? What is your current policy or practice around this particular bill proposal? So they're going to be reaching out to you with questions, including what actual costs might be to inform fiscal notes. And I would just beg of you to take each one of those very seriously. We rely on you for relevant and timely information in order to inform legislators as well as WSSDA's advocacy efforts representing you and your experiences boots on the ground. So be on the lookout for those communications, but I also wanted you to know how we go about determining how WSSDA will weigh in on any given bill. And then I would also remind you that your district, your board, has the opportunity to weigh in on any bill as well. You may have a local process for how you determine how you might weigh in on a bill, who's responsible for leading that charge, and does it require a board decision or a vote? Again, that would be a locally determined process, but there are times and that are not out of the ordinary, where WSSDA might weigh in on a bill representing the full swath of membership in one way, but different school districts show up and have different perspectives on that bill. And that is perfectly fine, acceptable, and we have come to expect that. So don't feel like you cannot operate on your own in that regard. Just a little look back at this past week. It was a fairly light week for the first week of a legislative session. We had a state of the state from an outgoing governor. We had an inaugural address from our incoming governor. Last night was the governor's ball celebrating his inaugural day. So lots of grounding in new faces and new positions, and we're still just figuring out where that lands us in the chess game. Amongst these ceremonies, there have also been hearings where bills have been brought forward. I wanted to call your attention to two actually from today. One was about concerning school district elections. It's always important to read what the bill actually says. This bill was heard in Senate Ed today, and I would call it a less super but not quite simple majority bill. So simple majority is 50% plus one. This would be a 55% bill, recognizing that it would help many districts, but our member adopted position is very clear in its advocacy for a simple majority. And so Rhonda Litzenberg from the Eatonville School District represented WSSDA today in as other on this bill, from the perspective that we are happy to see it moving in the right direction. It will help school districts, and for that we are grateful. And we urge and beg of you to support a true simple majority on this very important proposal, so that all districts can benefit from the same type of vote as any other vote, which is a 50% plus one vote. 5190, we signed in pro on this one. Love the flexibility of it. Know that many of you are struggling to meet deadlines and cost requirements for the state energy performance standard deadlines. And so this bill would essentially extend them out for 10 years. So we signed in pro. Just wanted to bring your attention to that. This is one of those good little flexibility bills that I don't want to lose sight of in the midst of all these other bills that are highly important or controversial, because we want to see good little bills like this move forward, because they are responsive to some of the needs that all of you have elevated. We need more time to do the work that you've asked us. Oh yeah, and the resources too. So now I want to turn to week 2, which is starting next week. The legislature meets on state holidays when state holidays fall during the legislative session. So there will be hearings even starting on Monday. Several very critical bills next Wednesday in Senate Early Learning and K-12 Education. This is a 1:30 hearing next Wednesday. Their plan is to hear all the bills on the Senate side that relate to the big 3. So there are 2 bills concerning special education funding, one on material supplies and operating costs, and one on student transportation. I want to thank Sarah Bettnell from the Shoreline School District, who put this nice side-by-side together on the difference between the special education funding bills. They have the same title, but different content, and I think it's important to pay attention to that. And thank you, Sarah, for outlining what the key differences are. As you'll see, they really relate to the percentiles for least restrictive environment, or LRE, as well as the distribution for safety net. And not exactly sure which vehicle will move forward, but it's good to see that this conversation is in play. And so I think there will be some negotiating as they hear more specifics about how this would impact your actual district. So what I'm asking of all of you is to take these bills to your special education director and your school business officers and talk about how this would impact not just your funding, because it moves the needle forward in all areas related to funding, but also how it impacts implementation as well as administration, as well as student experience. Policy issues, thinking about what it looks like in the classroom, and potentially bringing those stories, those real world stories, to the legislature will be very helpful for them in determining which version of these bills are the ones that are best to move forward. And that really comes from all of you. Then there's also the material supplies or MSOC bill. This is a Senator Noble's bill. It is a good bill. It moves the needle forward in terms of our current allocation for MSOC. I will just let you know that it's not as good as we want it to be. There is a House version that Representative Berg has been working on extensively that is in the $450 million range. We recognize that that most likely will not be the final budget decision, but we like to start with what we hope to receive. And this bill from Nobles on the Senate side is good, and we want to be supportive of it, but it's about a quarter of the total amount that the House version would be. And so we will be supportive of moving the needle in this space, but we will do our preference for the House version. And then last, I wanted to share that the student transportation bill, again, doesn't go as far as we want it to in terms of overhauling the STARS formula to meet actual needs, but it does move the needle for McKinney-Vento students experiencing homelessness. So its focus is on ensuring that students McKinney-Vento students experiencing homelessness are getting the transportation that they need in order to get to and from school safely and predictably. So again, it's not everything that we want, but it's a step in the right direction. So in terms of strategy, as we work closely with our other education partners, WSSDA will be supporting this as a package with WASA and PTA. And what we would hope is that you as a school district have the opportunity for one or more of those to bring forward what's the true implication to this policy implementation. Is it enough? Does it go far enough? What can you do with it? And what will still be left undone if it doesn't go all the way? So your help is critical as it relates to those particular questions. I also wanted to show you the comprehensive schedule for next week, and we're getting close to the end of time. So we're not going to dig into the policy details, but I wanted to alert you to some of the things coming up next week. I'm going to stop share again, just in case that didn't quite go to where I wanted it. I'm hoping this is showing the schedule. So if the 20th is Monday, it's a fairly light start to the week, but at 8 a.m. on Tuesday in Senate Learning and K-12 Education, there are going to be 4 bills that your board, you as an individual school board member and your school board as a whole and your district as a whole are going to have probably some very strong opinions about. They are all related to parent rights initiative, student civil rights, and expanding definitions for anti-discrimination categories, including changing language in statute to gender inclusive and gender expansive schools to support gender expansive students. And so I would encourage you to take a look at all 4 of these bills, to weigh in from your own district's perspective on one or be focusing our attention on 5179 with high level of concern. I anticipate we will be opposing this bill. It is very heavy-handed. It adds compliance monitoring to the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction for a complaints process, to address non-compliance. So essentially, if it's interpreted from anyone within the school district or community that a school board member or superintendent is not following the law, it enables them to first go through the complaints process at the local level, but if they're unsuccessful at that level, they can take it to OSPI for intervention. And one of the intervention options would be for OSPI to reduce the state funding allocation to the school district. Our obvious concern, most obvious concern about that is that it's punishing students for an adult problem. And so we are collecting our thoughts about all of these policy proposals. We may weigh in on some of the others, but our attention will definitely be to 5179 because we have deep concern about how heavy-handed it is and that it creates liability for districts even when they are following the law. So please pay attention to that and talk with your legal counsel about all of those. And that's on Tuesday. And then on Senate Ed, the very next day is the conversation around the big three. So it's a big week next week, just for those two committees alone. Luckily, House Education is still doing a lot of work sessions. They are going to hear some other bills. I'll show you on Thursday at 8:30 a.m. They have a financial education instruction graduation requirement. Conversation. This is a softer version of Representative Rood's version from last year. They've worked closely with State Board of Education to soften it a bit, but we will likely be weighing in on that. And then there are several others. I will also tell you that 1296 is in many ways similar to the heavy-handed Senate bill that I just referenced, 5179. It's not a companion bill, but there are a lot of parallels. So we'll be weighing in on both of those and would encourage you to take a look at them as well. We're very close to time and I want to honor yours. So I will just point to the agenda again, where there are many resources that I hope will be helpful to you. Including, like I said, the legislative roster, legislature online. You can watch all of the hearings live from the comforts of your home, and you can testify from the comforts of your home. There's a way you can sign in and testify remotely. If you need any help with that, I'm happy to provide that support. And several ways you can stay informed through WSSDA, through the resources listed here. I'm at time. There's more for us to talk about, but we will continue this conversation next week. And in the in-between time, please do not hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions or have any ideas or feedback, stories or data to share that would inform how we show up next week on our collective behalf. Appreciate all you do and for being here today. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.